The first time I heard the name, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded like something people say to scare themselves at night. The Society of Broken Necks. It felt exaggerated, almost theatrical, like a campfire story that gets passed around until no one remembers where it started. If I had known then what that name really meant, I would have shut the door, turned off my phone, and gone back to my quiet, ordinary life. But curiosity has a way of whispering when everything else is silent, and that whisper followed me longer than I want to admit. I'm not the kind of person who goes looking for secret societies or hidden groups. I'm careful. I work a normal job, keep a small circle, and avoid drama. That's why this still doesn't make sense to me. How someone like me ended up tangled in something so strange, so unsettling, that even now I lower my voice when I talk about it. Maybe that's part of why I'm telling this story at all. To finally say it out loud. To make sense of the choices that led me here. Or maybe to warn someone else before they make the same mistake. It started with a message. No profile picture, no real name. Just a plain sentence that appeared on my screen late one night. You notice things other people don't. I almost ignored it. Messages like that usually mean spam or scams. But something about the timing bothered me. That day, I had caught myself watching people more closely than usual. How they moved, how they held their heads, how some of them seemed stiff, almost strained, as if they were carrying invisible weight on their shoulders. I hadn't told anyone that. Yet here was this message, acting like it already knew. I replied with a simple question mark. The response came instantly. We've been watching you. That should have been enough to scare me off. Instead, it pulled me in. I told myself it was a joke, maybe someone I knew playing around. The conversation stayed vague, careful, never threatening. The sender talked about awareness, about seeing cracks in everyday life, about how most people walk forward without ever looking back. Then they mentioned the society, not as a threat, as an invitation. According to them, the Society of Broken Necks wasn't about violence or harm. That was the first lie, or maybe the first half-truth. They described it as a group for people who had looked too far behind them. People who had turned their heads toward uncomfortable truths and felt something shift inside. They talked about mental strain, about the cost of awareness, about how once you notice certain things, you can't unsee them. The name, they said, was symbolic. A reminder of what happens when you turn too fast, too far, without support. I should have stopped there. But I didn't. Over the next few weeks, I was drawn deeper into conversations that felt personal in a way I couldn't explain. They knew details about my routines, my habits, even small moments I thought no one else noticed. They talked about fear in a calm, almost comforting way. Like fear wasn't something to run from, but something to sit with. Learn from. Control. It didn't feel dark at first. It felt thoughtful. Intelligent. Almost kind. When they finally asked if I wanted to meet, my stomach tightened. The meeting place was ordinary. A public library meeting room. Bright lights. Neutral walls. No symbols, no cloaks, nothing dramatic. There were 6 of them. Men and women, different ages, all quiet, all watching me with the same careful attention. They didn't smile much. When they did, it felt practiced. Like they were mirroring what they thought I expected to see. They talked about community, about shared understanding, about how the world bends people in subtle ways, slowly twisting them until something inside feels wrong. They said the society existed to help members realign. To prevent the break. Again, the name came up, explained as a warning, not a goal. I remember feeling relieved by that. I remember thinking maybe I had judged too quickly. That maybe this was just another support group with an edgy title. Joining didn't require money. That surprised me. It required commitment. Listening. Observing. Keeping certain conversations private. They asked me to pay attention to small changes in people around me. Not judge. Just notice. The way someone avoided mirrors. The way someone flinched when turning their head. The way tensions settled into their posture over time. It sounded harmless. Almost like mindfulness. Almost like care. But slowly, the tone shifted. The exercises became more intense. The discussions more unsettling. They talked about how denial creates strain. How refusing to face certain truths causes damage. They used metaphors that made my skin crawl. About pressure. About limits. About what happens when something bends too far without release. They never described anything graphic. They didn't need to. The implications were enough. What disturbed me most was how normal it all felt while I was inside it. How easy it was to accept their logic when everyone around me nodded in agreement. How doubts felt like personal weakness instead of warning signs. They encouraged isolation from people who weren't ready. They praised silence. They rewarded obedience with reassurance. And somehow, without realizing when it happened, I stopped talking about the society to anyone outside it. The regret didn't come all at once. It crept in quietly. A moment here. A sentence there. A look exchanged during a meeting that lasted just a second too long. I began to notice things about the other members that didn't match the calm words they spoke. Stiff movements. Tension that never left their bodies. Eyes that seemed afraid to turn away from whoever was speaking. And then there were the rules I hadn't noticed before. Rules about where to stand. How to sit. When to look away. The night everything changed, I was given a choice. They called it a test. A step deeper into understanding. They said once I crossed that line, there would be no going back. Not because they would stop me, but because I would finally see what the society truly was. I remember my hands shaking. I remember thinking about how far I had already come, and how hard it would be to explain any of this to someone on the outside. I wish I could tell you I walked away immediately. I wish I could say I trusted my instincts without hesitation. But the truth is I stayed. Long enough to hear something I was never meant to hear. Long enough to realize the name was not just symbolic. Long enough to understand why so many people joined quietly and why so few ever spoke about leaving. I'm telling you this now because what happened next is something I can't forget. Something that still wakes me up at night. Something that made me understand, in a way I never wanted to, why they call themselves the Society of Broken Necks. And why joining them was the biggest regret of my life. After that night, things stopped feeling accidental. Every interaction with the society felt planned, measured, like I was being guided down a narrow hallway with no windows. They didn't rush me. That was the strange part. There was no pressure in the usual sense. No shouting, no threats. Just calm voices and patient pauses that made silence feel heavier than words. They told me understanding takes time, and that fear often shows up right before clarity. They began sharing stories from their past. Not all at once. One at a time, like carefully chosen confessions. A woman named Mara talked about her old life as a physical therapist. She said she used to help people with neck pain, tension, stiffness from stress. She laughed softly when she said most of her patients never fix the real problem. You can't heal what you refuse to turn toward, she said. At the time, it sounded poetic. Now, it chills me. Another member, Elias, spoke about working night security. He described long hours, watching people through cameras, noticing patterns most ignored. How often people checked behind themselves. How often they avoided it. He said awareness always starts with a glance over the shoulder. Most people keep their eyes forward because they're afraid of what might be behind them, he said. We teach people to look. I noticed how often they used the word teach. Not help. Not guide. Teach. As if the rest of the world was ignorant and they alone understood something fundamental about fear and control. They talked about society like it was asleep, like it had chosen comfort over truth. And they spoke about themselves as caretakers of a difficult knowledge. The meetings moved locations. Always public. Always ordinary. Cafes, community halls, quiet parks during the day. Nothing that would attract attention. That made it harder to see anything wrong. How could something dangerous exist in places so normal? That question kept circling my mind, but every time I tried to bring it up, they redirected the conversation. Gently. Skillfully. Making me feel like the doubt itself was proof I was getting closer to understanding. They gave me assignments. Simple ones at first. Sit in a crowded place and observe how people hold their heads. Notice who seems relaxed and who seems tense. Pay attention to how often people turn around when they feel watched.
Write it down.
No names. No photos. Just observations. It felt harmless, almost academic. Like research. But something about it made me uneasy. I couldn't explain why. As weeks passed, the assignments became more personal. They asked about my childhood. About moments when I felt watched. About times I avoided looking back, both literally and metaphorically. They listened closely. Too closely. Sometimes finishing my sentences for me. Sometimes nodding before I even spoke, like they already knew what I was going to say. I started dreaming about turning my head and feeling resistance, like something was stopping me. In the dreams, I never saw what was behind me. I always woke up before that. When I mentioned this, they exchanged glances. Not surprised. Almost satisfied. That's awareness forming, Mara told me. Don't fight it. Outside the society, my life began to shrink. Friends commented that I seemed distracted, distant. I caught myself scanning rooms instead of enjoying conversations. I stopped sitting with my back to doors. I started noticing how often people avoided eye contact when passing me. Or maybe they always had, and I was just now paying attention. That was the problem. I couldn't tell anymore. One evening, after a meeting ran longer than usual, Elias walked with me to my car. He didn't speak much. Just asked if I felt ready. Ready for what? I asked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. To stop pretending the name is just a metaphor, he said. That sentence followed me home. It replayed in my mind while I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the way they sat during meetings, how straight their posture was, how careful their movements seemed, how no one ever stretched their neck or rolled their shoulders the way people normally do when they're tired. I realized I had started copying them without noticing. The next meeting was smaller. Just 4 of us. They said it was intentional. That smaller groups were better for honesty. The conversation turned toward consequences. Toward what happens when people refuse to face certain truths. They spoke in abstract terms, never describing anything directly. But the message was clear. Avoidance leads to damage. Denial leads to breakage. Awareness, they claimed, was the only prevention. I asked a question then. The first real challenge I'd voiced since joining. I asked what happened to people who couldn't handle the awareness. The room went quiet. Too quiet. Mara finally answered, choosing her words carefully. Some leave, she said. Some stay longer than they should. And some, she stopped. Looked at me. Some become examples. No one explained what that meant. They didn't have to. The silence did all the work. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I wanted to leave. I wanted to stand up and walk out and never come back. But my body didn't move. Fear kept me still, and curiosity kept me listening. They told me there was another step. A private discussion. Not a ceremony. Not a ritual. Just a conversation where everything would make sense. They said I could say no. That the choice was mine. But the way they looked at me made it clear that choosing no would change things. Not immediately. But eventually. That's when I noticed something else. A faint mark on Elias's neck. Just below the hairline. It looked old. Healed. But the skin there didn't move the same way as the rest when he turned his head. I tried not to stare. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. An injury. An accident. Anything but what my mind was suggesting. When the meeting ended, no one walked me to my car this time. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, hands resting but not gripping, afraid that if I turned my head too fast, I might feel that same resistance from my dreams. I realized then that whatever the society was truly about, it wasn't just ideas. It wasn't just awareness. It was something that left marks. Not always visible. Not always immediate. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the word examples. About the way they spoke of people who couldn't handle awareness as if they were lessons instead of individuals. About how easily I had accepted their logic step by step. And somewhere between fear and exhaustion, another thought crept in, quieter but more terrifying than the rest. What if I was already too far in to leave without becoming one of those examples? I tried to act normal after that. At work, at home, even in front of the mirror. But once a thought takes root, it doesn't stay quiet. Every time I turned my head, even slightly, I became aware of the movement in a way I never had before. Muscles tightening. A subtle pull. A reminder that something fragile connected thought to action. I wondered if that was what the society wanted. Not fear exactly, but constant awareness. The kind that never lets you relax. A few days later, I got another message. Same sender. Same calm tone. They said they had noticed I was unsettled. That word again. Not asked. Not guessed. Noticed. They suggested we meet one-on-one just to talk. No pressure. No agenda. I told myself this was my chance to get answers. Or, at least confirm that I was overthinking everything. The meeting was with Mara. We sat in a small cafe near the edge of town. Morning crowd. Soft noise. Safe setting. She spoke about her life before the society in more detail this time. About burnout. About feeling like she was fixing symptoms instead of causes. She said the society gave her language for something she had always felt but never understood. When I asked her directly about the name, she didn't dodge it. Names are meant to remind, she said. They're not meant to comfort. I asked her about Elias's neck. I tried to make it sound casual. She paused just long enough for me to notice. Then she smiled gently and said accidents happen. People get hurt. What matters, she said, is what you learn from it. The way she said it made my skin prickle. Like the injury was secondary. Like the lesson was the point. She asked me why I was really afraid. I said I wasn't sure anymore. That was the truth. I was afraid of staying, but I was also afraid of what leaving might mean. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice, and said fear always sharpens right before growth. That the society didn't trap people. People trapped themselves by refusing to look back at what scared them. After that conversation, I started noticing gaps. People who were mentioned once and then never again. Members who stopped showing up without explanation. When I asked, I was told they had completed their path or chosen rest. The words sounded peaceful, but the lack of detail gnawed at me. No goodbyes. No messages. Just absence. One night, I broke one of the unspoken rules. I searched for information online. Not the society directly, but phrases they used. Awareness groups. Posture psychology. Stress communities. Buried deep in forums and archived posts, I found fragments. People describing groups that encouraged hyper-awareness to the point of obsession. Stories about control disguised as care. About isolation framed as enlightenment. Nothing directly linked, but the patterns felt familiar. I saved screenshots. I don't know why. Maybe as proof for myself that I wasn't imagining things. Or maybe because some part of me already knew I would need evidence later. At the next meeting, I saw someone new. Younger than most of us. Quiet. Nervous. He kept adjusting his collar, touching the back of his neck, when he thought no one was looking. I saw myself in him, just earlier in the process. The society welcomed him warmly. Too warmly. Like they were relieved to have someone fresh. During the discussion, they talked about responsibility. About how once you see certain truths, you're responsible for carrying them correctly. Mishandling awareness, they said, could be dangerous. Not just to yourself, but to others. That word again. Dangerous. Still abstract. Still clean. But heavier every time they used it. I noticed how the newer member listened. How his eyes moved from speaker to speaker, trying to keep up. How tense his shoulders were. I wondered what he had been told. What had drawn him here. I wondered if someone was already watching him the way they had watched me. After the meeting, he approached me quietly and asked if the tension ever went away. I didn't know what to say. Mara watched us from across the room. I felt that familiar pressure, the invisible line I wasn't supposed to cross. I told him it gets easier if you don't fight it. The words tasted wrong in my mouth, but they were the ones the society would approve of. His relief was immediate, and that scared me more than anything else. Later that night, Elias called me. Not messaged. Called. He said the society was considering me for deeper involvement. That my questions showed commitment, not doubt. He said they needed people who could think critically without breaking. I asked him what breaking meant. He laughed softly and said it meant different things to different people. I asked him why people left without a trace. He didn't answer right away. Then he said some paths are private, and not all journeys are meant to be witnessed. I pressed him harder than I ever had before. I asked what happens if someone decides to walk away completely. He went quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but something underneath it felt tight. Walking away is still a choice, he said. But choices have consequences. Awareness doesn't disappear just because you want it to. After that call, I realized something important. The society didn't need to chase people who left. They relied on what they had already planted. The constant awareness. The fear of unseen consequences. The idea that turning away was itself dangerous. I started to feel watched again. Not in a dramatic way. No shadows. No footsteps. Just the sense that my reactions were being measured. That hesitation itself was data. I tested it once. Skipped a meeting without explanation. No one contacted me that day. Or the next. On the third day, I received a message. Just one sentence. We noticed you've been resting. Resting. As if they had permission to define my absence. As if distance was just another phase they controlled. That's when I understood the real conflict. It wasn't about leaving or staying. It was about whether I still belonged to myself. Whether my thoughts were mine, or shaped so carefully that I mistook control for clarity. I thought about the younger member. About the missing ones. About the marks I had started to see once I knew where to look. I don't know how much time I have before the society decides I've reached a conclusion they don't approve of. I don't know if sharing this story is already a step too far. But I do know this. The society of broken necks doesn't break you all at once. It teaches you to hold still long enough that you don't realize when you've stopped being able to turn away. After that message, I stopped pretending I could drift quietly to the edges. The society had a way of tightening its grip without touching you at all. I could feel it in the pauses between notifications, in the way silence itself started to feel like a response. Every ordinary moment carried an extra layer now, like I was living two lives at once. The one everyone could see, and the one being quietly observed. I went back to the forums late at night, scrolling through old threads until my eyes burned. This time, I searched for disappearances. People who had joined groups focused on awareness, posture, psychological discipline. Most posts were vague, cautious, written by people afraid of saying too much. But a pattern emerged. The language. The gradual isolation. The way concern was reframed as weakness. One post stood out. It mentioned a group that believed looking away is more dangerous than staying still. That sentence hit me hard. I had heard it before, just dressed up differently. I tried to reach out to one of the users who posted it. The account was inactive. Last login, years ago. At the next meeting, the room felt smaller. The air heavier. The younger member was there again, sitting closer to Mara this time. His posture was already changing. Straighter. More rigid. He barely moved his head when someone spoke, turning his eyes instead. I wondered if he had noticed yet. Or if he still believed this was all leading somewhere safe. The discussion focused on loyalty. Not using the word directly, but circling it. Trust. Responsibility. Carrying the weight of awareness without letting it harm others. Elias spoke more than usual, pacing slowly as he talked. He said the society was entering a delicate phase. That external curiosity had increased. That misinformation was dangerous. He looked at me when he said that. Just for a second. Long enough for the message to land. Afterward, Mara pulled me aside. She said the society wanted to move forward with my private discussion. The step I'd been warned about. She said it wasn't mandatory, but delaying too long could be seen as resistance. She asked if I was ready to fully understand the cost of awareness. I asked her what happened if I said no. She studied my face, like she was checking for cracks. Then you'll carry unfinished tension, she said. And tension always finds a release. That night I noticed something new. A stiffness at the base of my neck that hadn't been there before. Not pain, just pressure. Like a reminder. I tried to stretch it away and felt a flicker of panic when it resisted even slightly. I laughed it off alone in my apartment, but the sound came out wrong.
Thin. Forced.
The society sent me details for the private discussion the next day. A time. A place. Still public. Still normal. But the wording of the message was different. More formal. Less warmth. It felt like a door closing softly but firmly behind me. I considered not going. Packing a bag. Leaving town for a while. But even as I planned it, doubts flooded in. Would that really end it? Or would I just carry the awareness with me? Exactly like Elias said? The society didn't need fences. It relied on what it had already taught you to fear. I tried to talk to someone outside. An old friend I trusted. I started vague. Testing the waters. Mentioned a group. Said it made me uncomfortable. He laughed and told me I was overthinking things, that I always did this when stressed. I almost told him everything. Almost. But the words tangled in my throat. I realized how hard it was to explain something that lived mostly in implication. In tone. In silence. When I hung up, I felt more alone than before. At the meeting place, only 3 people were waiting. Mara.
Elias.
And someone I hadn't seen before. Older.
Calm.
He introduced himself as Thomas. He said very little. Just watched. The way he stood made my neck tense for reasons I couldn't explain. They didn't sit right away. They asked me to stand with them.
To breathe.
To relax my shoulders. It felt like the start of one of the early exercises, familiar enough to lower my guard. Elias talked about balance. About how awareness requires alignment. How carrying too much tension in one direction creates strain. I asked again what alignment meant. Thomas spoke for the first time. His voice was steady, practiced. He said alignment meant accepting limits. Knowing how far you can turn without damage. Knowing when to stop. The way he said damage made my stomach twist. They asked me what I thought the society really was. I answered carefully. Too carefully. I said it was about understanding fear. About seeing what others ignore. Elias nodded. Mara smiled. But Thomas didn't react. He asked what I regretted most since joining. The question caught me off guard. I said I regretted not trusting my instincts sooner. The room went quiet. That's when I realized this wasn't about teaching anymore. It was about assessment. They asked if I trusted them. Not as a group. Individually. I hesitated. That hesitation felt loud. Elias said trust requires vulnerability. That holding back creates risk. He said the society couldn't afford members who might fracture under pressure. I thought of the missing members. The word examples echoed in my mind. I thought of the younger member, already adjusting himself without being told. I thought of the stiffness in my own neck, the dreams, the fear of turning away. Thomas stepped closer. Not threatening. Just close enough that I could smell his cologne. He said the society needed to know if I could carry awareness without becoming a liability. He said this was the moment where paths diverged. Not dramatically. Quietly. Permanently. They asked me to make a choice. Not out loud yet. Just to decide. To feel it settle. To understand what staying or leaving would cost me. As I stood there, heart pounding, neck tight, I realized something terrifying. Whatever choice I made, the society would learn something from it.
About me.
About how far they could go. And as they watched my hesitation with calm, patient eyes, I understood that the climax wasn't coming from what they were about to do. It was coming from what they expected me to do next. I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. No one rushed me. That was their strength. They knew pressure works best when it feels self-inflicted. I focused on my breathing, on keeping my shoulders loose, on not reacting the way I knew they were watching for. That's when Thomas did something unexpected. He turned slightly and nodded toward the window. Outside, across the street, someone was standing still. A familiar shape. A familiar posture. The younger member. He wasn't looking at us directly, but his reflection in the glass made it clear he knew exactly where we were. My stomach dropped. He's here to observe, Thomas said calmly. Just like you once were. Mara watched my face carefully. Elias didn't look at the window at all. He didn't need to. This wasn't coincidence. This was design. I asked why he was there. Elias finally spoke. He said the society believes awareness should be witnessed, not hidden. That seeing choices made in real time helps newer members understand consequences without explanation. My pulse spiked. This wasn't just about me anymore. I wasn't being tested in private. I was being demonstrated. I asked the question I had been avoiding since the beginning. I asked what happens when someone fails their assessment. No metaphors. No soft language. Just the truth. Thomas smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He said failure was the wrong word. He said some people simply reveal limits they didn't know they had. And limits, once revealed, must be respected. The way he emphasized that last word made my neck tighten involuntarily. That's when I noticed something else. Thomas never fully turned his head when he spoke. Not once. He rotated his whole body instead, careful and deliberate. It wasn't stiffness. It was discipline. The kind that comes from learning something the hard way. The younger member shifted outside, clearly uncomfortable now. His hand kept brushing the back of his neck, the same nervous habit I'd once had. I wondered if he knew what role he was playing, or if he believed, like I once did, that observation was harmless. Mara stepped closer and lowered her voice. She told me this was an opportunity. That moments like this were rare. That few people were given the chance to decide consciously instead of being shaped gradually. She said whatever choice I made would ripple outward. That responsibility was part of true awareness. Then she said something that shattered the last illusion I had left. She told me the society had been watching me long before I ever received that first message. I felt dizzy. She explained that I'd been noticed months earlier. My routines, my habits, my tendency to look back when others didn't. Elias had confirmed it. Thomas had reviewed it. The message wasn't an invitation. It was a conclusion they'd already reached. I asked what would have happened if I had ignored it. Thomas answered without hesitation. He said someone else would have approached me. In person. That they preferred digital distance, but they adapted when necessary. The calm certainty in his voice told me this wasn't speculation. My sense of time warped. Every interaction I'd brushed off suddenly felt staged. Every coincidence sharpened into intent. I realized the twist wasn't that the society was watching people. It was that they were patient enough to wait until people watched themselves. Elias asked me to look at the younger member again. To really look. He asked what I saw. I said I saw fear. Elias nodded. He said fear was good. Fear meant alignment hadn't been forced yet. He said the society intervened only when fear turned into resistance. I asked what intervention meant. No one answered. Instead, Thomas took a small step back, creating space. An opening. A path. He said if I wanted to walk away, this was the moment. No punishment. No chase. Just separation. But his eyes told a different story. Separation didn't mean freedom. It meant being reclassified. Then came the second twist, the one that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Thomas said the society had already prepared a replacement if I chose to leave. I looked at the younger member. He finally looked back at me directly. His eyes were wide, searching my face for guidance. For reassurance. For permission. I realized then that my choice wasn't just about me. It was about what lesson he would learn from watching it. Stay, and I became proof that surrender brings safety. Leave, and I became a cautionary tale he'd internalize without ever hearing the details. The society had turned my decision into a teaching tool. Mara asked me to speak. To explain my choice out loud, whatever it was. She said clarity helps everyone involved. My throat tightened. Words felt dangerous now. Every sentence could be reframed, reused, recycled into doctrine. I noticed my neck again. The pressure was stronger. Not painful. Just present. Like my body understood something my mind was still resisting. I realized then that the real danger wasn't what the society might do next. It was what they had already done. They had made my agency visible, measurable, and useful to them no matter which direction it went. Thomas checked his watch. He said they didn't have all day. Awareness, he reminded me, loses value when delayed too long. As I stood there, Caught between staying and leaving, between being an example or a warning, I felt the weight of every quiet meeting, every carefully chosen word, every moment I had ignored my instincts. The Society of Broken Necks wasn't waiting to break me. They were waiting to see whether I would do it to myself. I took a breath and did the one thing the society hadn't prepared me for. I told the truth. Not the polished version they liked. Not the careful language they taught me. I said I was afraid. I said the awareness they promised felt less like clarity and more like a cage. I said I didn't believe a group that claimed to protect people from breaking should build itself around fear of what happens if you turn away. For the first time since I joined, no one nodded. The younger member outside leaned closer to the glass. I could see my reflection layered over his face, both of us tense, both waiting. Elias's jaw tightened. Mara looked disappointed, not angry, like a teacher watching a student fail an important test. Thomas stayed calm, but something shifted in his eyes. I said I was leaving, not resting, not pausing, leaving. The room didn't erupt. There was no confrontation, no raised voices. That almost made it worse. Thomas nodded slowly, as if confirming a calculation. He said my choice had been noted. He said awareness doesn't end just because affiliation does. He reminded me that once you've learned to look back, you always feel it when you stop. Then, he surprised me. He said I was free to go. No conditions. No warnings. Just that. The word free felt unreal, like it belonged to another life. I waited for the catch. It didn't come. Mara opened the door herself. Elias stepped aside. The path out was clear. As I walked past the window, I met the younger member's eyes. I didn't explain. I didn't lecture. I just shook my head slightly, a quiet no. His face fell, but there was relief there too. Confusion, but also choice. I hoped it would be enough. I didn't run. I walked. Every step felt heavy, like my body expected resistance that never came. Outside, the air felt sharper, colder.
Real.
I turned my head slowly, deliberately, testing myself. Nothing stopped me. No pain. No pressure. Just movement. For a while, I thought that was it. That I had escaped. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet. No messages. No calls. No reminders. I waited for the fear to spike, for the awareness to consume me the way Elias had promised. It didn't. The tension in my neck faded. The dream stopped. Life didn't snap back to normal overnight, but it began to loosen, like a grip slowly releasing. I started telling my story.
Carefully.
Anonymously. Not naming the society at first, just describing the patterns. The language. The control hidden behind calm words. People responded. Some thanked me. Some asked questions. A few told me they'd been part of something similar. None used the same name, but the structure was familiar enough to be unsettling. Then one evening, weeks later, I got a message. Not from the society. From the younger member. He said he had left too. That my choice had mattered more than he realized at the time. He said when the society tried to reposition him, something had cracked. Not in his body, but in his belief. He said once you see how a choice is used as a lesson, it's hard to unsee it. I felt a rush of relief so strong it almost knocked the breath out of me. But the story didn't end there. A few days after that, I noticed something strange online. The forums where I'd found fragments before were gone. Threads deleted. Accounts wiped. Even cached pages disappeared. It was like someone had gone through and carefully erased every loose end. At first, I panicked, thinking the society was covering its tracks. Then I saw a familiar phrase pop up in a completely different context. An article about productivity culture. Another about mindfulness communities. Another about leadership training. Different names. Different faces. Same language. Awareness. Alignment. Responsibility. Limits. That's when the final realization hit me. The Society of Broken Necks wasn't a single group. It was a model. A way of thinking that could be copied, rebranded, softened, and sold anywhere people were tired, anxious, and searching for meaning. The society didn't need to hunt people anymore. The world was doing the work for them. I understood then why they let me go. Why there was no chase. No punishment. They hadn't lost anything. I wasn't a threat to them. I was proof that the system worked even when someone walked away. The awareness stayed. The fear lingered. The story spread. And the most unsettling part wasn't that I had escaped something dangerous. It was realizing how close I'd come to becoming someone who would calmly stand in a room, watching another person make a choice, believing it was for their own good. They call themselves the Society of Broken Necks because the real break doesn't happen in the body. It happens the moment you accept that looking away is more dangerous than staying still. I regret joining because it taught me how easily good intentions can be shaped into quiet control. And even now, when I turn my head too fast, I still wonder who's watching. Not because they're there, but because I learned how to look. After that realization settled in, the fear slowly changed shape. It didn't vanish, but it stopped controlling every thought. I began to understand that awareness itself wasn't the enemy. It was how it had been framed, sharpened, and used. The society had taken something natural, our instinct to notice danger, to reflect, to look back, and turned it into a constant state of tension. Once I saw that clearly, the power it held over me weakened. I stayed in contact with a younger member for a while. His name was Aaron. He told me leaving hadn't been easy. The society hadn't chased him, just like they hadn't chased me. Instead, they tried to redefine his doubts as failure, as weakness. When that didn't work, they went quiet. That silence, he said, was almost worse than confrontation. But over time, the quiet gave him space to think. Real space. Not the controlled kind. Aaron said his body felt different now. Less rigid. He hadn't realized how tense he'd been until the tension faded. That stuck with me. How many people walk around carrying invisible strain because someone convinced them it was clarity? How many confuse constant alertness with growth? As for me, I stopped searching for the society online. There was no point anymore. I knew now that even if one group disappeared, the mindset would surface somewhere else. Under a different name. With cleaner language. With softer promises. That was the real danger. Not secret meetings or shadowy figures, but ideas that sound reasonable until you're living inside them. I went back to my old routines. Slowly.
Carefully.
I reconnected with friends I'd pushed away. I listened more than I spoke at first, unsure how to explain where I'd been without sounding unhinged. When I did talk about it, I focused on patterns instead of names. Control disguised as care. Isolation sold as enlightenment. Awareness turned into obligation. People understood more than I expected them to. Some nights, I still caught myself checking behind me. Still felt that brief spike of tension when my neck moved too fast. But now, instead of fear, I treated it like a reminder. Not that I was being watched, but that I had learned something the hard way. That knowledge doesn't have to be heavy to be real. I answered the questions that had haunted me since the beginning. What happened to the missing members? I don't know for sure, but I know now that not all disappearances are dramatic. Some people don't vanish physically. They just fold inward. They become quieter versions of themselves, convinced they've chosen peace when they've really chosen stillness. That might be what the society meant by rest. Why did the society let me go? Because control doesn't always require force. Sometimes it just requires planting an idea and trusting it to grow on its own. They believed the awareness they gave me would keep me tethered forever. They were wrong about that, but I understand why they thought it. What was the society really afraid of? Not rebellion. Not exposure. They were afraid of people realizing that awareness should expand choice, not shrink it. The moment someone understands that, the structure collapses. I still tell this story, even knowing it might echo in places I'll never see. I don't do it to scare people. I do it to give language to a feeling many already have. That sense that something isn't right when a group demands silence in the name of growth. When questions are praised until they become inconvenient. When fear is reframed as responsibility. If there's one thing I want people to take away from this, it's this. Any community that tells you looking away is dangerous should be questioned. Reflection is healthy. Obsession is not. Awareness should make your world bigger, not smaller. It should help you move freely, not teach you how to hold still. The Society of Broken Necks taught me that the most effective control doesn't feel like control at all. It feels like guidance. It feels like belonging. It feels like finally understanding something others don't. Until one day, you realize your understanding came at the cost of your ease, your trust, your ability to turn without fear. I regret joining because I gave someone else permission to define my limits. I regret how close I came to becoming a lesson instead of a person. But I don't regret leaving. Leaving gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost.
Choice.
Now, when I turn my head, I do it without thinking, without testing myself, without listening for imaginary rules. The world behind me is just another part of the world, not a threat, not a test. And if you ever hear about a group that promises clarity but thrives on tension, that speaks softly about consequences while never naming them, remember this story. Remember that nothing worth learning should require you to live in fear of moving freely. The Society of Broken Necks didn't break my body. It almost broke my sense of self. And walking away, quietly, deliberately, was how I put it back together.